Hi.
I'm
Thanks.
not sure how
Thanks for
you are.
joining. Yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
joining. I
I
know
just
it's
wanted to take a look what's it like.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Mike from Atlanta, meet Mike from the Ukraine, and I have actually met Mike in real life. It's nice to see a familiar face here. Um, I do think we'll have. Well, here's another one. We have Jonas. Looks like Roger. Hi, Jonas.
Hi.
And a third mic. We have
Uh,
three mics today. That's got to be a record. The revenge of the mics here. Hey, how did you get your name across your screen? That's pretty cool, Mike Cone.
uh, One of the Google plugins for the
That's really
help with the
clever. I would like to say that you actually look younger on your video than you do on your picture. I would recommend that you update your picture.
yeah. I was thinking about that too. I started noticing that. I'm like,
Anyway, are we set to go, you think?
yeah, we're a minute after. We should be good.
Okay. Okay, so before I get started, I'm currently recording video, and I hope to make this whole thing available on YouTube like I did last time. However, if anybody objects to that, I will turn the video off and I will not post it. Does anybody object to us having our sights and sounds recorded? All right. Okay, so welcome to the February 2015 edition of the Google Plus Hangout for the Show and Tell for Django CMS. Um, I didn't have any, I don't have any, I don't personally have any new projects that I can share with anybody. I do work on all kinds of things all the time, but some of them I'm not allowed to share. Some of them are not nice enough to share. Um, However, since the last time, I did work a little bit on my own personal website. And hey, Arnie, thanks for joining us. Arnie, just so you'll know, we are recording video and sounds here, and this will be shared on YouTube. I hope if it comes out. So just a heads up on that. Anyway, so I was working on my own website, and I'm going to show you guys that. I'll show you now. Hold on. Figure out how to share screen. This is fine. Okay, so I have this is my own. This is part of my own website, and one of the pages you can see I'm actually logged in, um, and I have this section here where you can see a bunch of different projects I've worked on, and if you click on one of them, you'll go to a page where we have basically some screenshots of the project. Now this particular project is largely a one pager, so I had to split it up into multiple pieces, but that's really beside the point. And then I have these call outs that talk about what it is that we're doing on these on the website, and basically I'm selling myself, right? That's what my website's all about. And so I have these form, function, and performance callouts that I do. And you can see there's multiple pages here of them. So this is more of the front page section, and then it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. But the important thing here is that I've had this website for many years, as you can tell by the dated design. And um, when I first put it together, I was using Django CMS 2.3, I think. And then later on, I went to 2.4 and then ultimately to 3.0. And in order to do these callouts, I have a data structure where I have where I'm capturing the basically the offset of where this point is or this point is relative to the captured image, right? And then and then I have some other data about these callouts. And then I use a lot of JavaScript to basically build these callouts and present them based on that data structure. And it was always very cumbersome for me to make these because I basically would have to go, originally I would have to go into the Django CMS, I'm sorry, the Django admin and, um, um, you know, I have to type in numbers. So I would be, I don't know if you guys can see my crosshairs here, but I would be measuring from the top left, grabbing those numbers, memorizing them, going into the admin and typing them in, and then typing everything else in. It was a lot of work, and because it was a lot of work, I tended not to do it so much, right? So I was thinking about it recently, and I decided I wanted to update that. And so what I did is I I used some of my own advice, So in one of the previous screencasts I did, not the Hangout, but one of the previous screencasts I did, I had shown how on another project I was able to attach basically models to other models. So I might have a many-to-many relationship, and I was able to create a menu item like this one up here, where I could attach something to a project. It would be a project in this case. So I did create that capability here, and I'm going to show you. So this right here is the project. If I click that, I can edit this particular project, and there's a whole bunch of data in here, and I don't know why it's going so slow. And it used to be that there was this big list down here after the project images where I would have to create all these annotations, and it's where I had to type in all the numbers, and it was really difficult. So then I said, well, you know what, I'm gonna get rid of that section at the bottom where I have the many-to-many and I have to type in all these numbers, and I'm going to create this new attach annotation, and basically doing what I've done for my other customers to make it easier for myself to manage my own website, which is nice. So that was working great, but then I started to realize that I have to pick the image that I'm going to be using, because this, if you remember, this has multiple images for the project, and so I would have to select which image I want to add the annotation to. I would have to type in the left and the right, or the top and the left, basically point X, point Y, which side I want it to be on, etc. And so that made it easier. Actually, it made it less cumbersome to do, but it was still a little bit annoying. So what I really wanted to do is have this, but I really wanted to have the image already populated, and I want to have the left and the right already populated. So I thought, you know what, maybe I can do that. And lo and behold, it wasn't hard. So now I have it, so you can just double click on the image, and it will bring up an add annotation dialog, modal dialog, and you can see that the point X and the point Y are already populated, and it knows which image I'm looking at. And in this case, I still have to choose which direction I want the annotation to go, but it already defaults to the one that the point I've selected is closest to the edge of. So if I click more over here, then it's going to give me a right, and if I click more over here, it's going to be a left, which 99% of the time that's going to be what I want. But sometimes I do actually want to pick a point here, but I want the annotation to go over here, and I still have that capability. So I thought it was worth sharing how I did this, because I think it's kind of another level of how you can integrate almost any kind of UI you can imagine for managing your web content for your projects, and you can integrate that into the CMS so that in my case, I'm the customer, but if I was doing this for another customer, I would be creating a much more seamless experience. And I've said this before, I really try to keep my customers out of the admin screens. And I do create these menus over here. So here we have a projects menu, a testimonials menu. That's pretty much the only two data structures I have in this website, but that are editable like this. I do tend to make the menus over here too, which makes it possible to go to pretty much anything you want without having to go into the admin. But more and more, I'm trying to move people away from using this kind of menu into doing the context-sensitive menus. So this particular one is telling me the project name right at the top, and I can edit the project right here, and then I can do this. But taking it that extra step in this case, so I have the double click or point and click experience. So I wanted to show you guys a little bit how I did this, and then there's some other things that I've done in the Intercoms project. You can see we're looking at the Intercoms project here, but I have it over here as well. And I did do some interesting things over here. Actually, it's a feature I'm about to roll out that's not rolled out yet, and I was hoping to actually get it where right before this call, I was trying to get final confirmation from the customer to switch it on, but it's not switched on yet. But I will show it to you guys, and you can have a look. Anyway, so let's first thing I want to do is maybe let's look at some of the code here so you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna make that a little bit smaller, and oops, hold up my project. This is the project. First of all, can somebody confirm that you can see my whole screen, including this Sublime text window? Is anybody still there?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Because I can't see you guys right now because I can only see my screen. Anyway, so what I did in this project is I have my projects app, and then I have in my views the actual project. So in this is my normal project view, and here's where I set up my menus. So you can see we have, and this is actually covered off in one of the screenshots I did, but this is the menu for the toolbar. I mean, I'm sorry. So that's the code for this menu over here, right? And that's fine. But I also wanted to have a menu for the particular view that you're looking at, so we have that as well. Somewhere in here, I think it's right here. Project member, yeah, I think this is it right here. So this is where we set up the menu for over here, the more context-sensitive version. And there's not really a whole lot of anything in here for the cool thing that I wanted to show you, where you can just double-click on the image to create a new annotation. But I do have this right here, and again, I even even the comment here, I pulled this right out of the screencast that I made earlier for creating this menu item right here, so you can attach something to another model by setting the defaults, and that works great. But now, like I mentioned, I want to show you how I did the point and click, and that really is almost entirely limited to the template for the project detail view, which would be here. So this is where all the magic happens for the JavaScript to create the annotations based on my model. And I'm not really here to talk about all that, but way at the bottom here I have this block here, which is basically, if we're in edit mode, do the following. And this is where I have that nice double click to annotate thing. So basically what I'm doing is I just call up a bit of JavaScript, and then I set my defaults. So my defaults are, I want to have access to the offset of where I double clicked relative to the image. And so there's a little bit of jQuery in here to figure that out, and I'll leave that up to you guys. And then once I get those offset figured out, and then I can figure out if it's going to be left or right as another default. And then the image, you remember I have to set the default image. That's also picked up in JavaScript as well, and I think that is, well, I guess it's right here. And the important thing is what we need is right here. So there is an API in place in the CMS, which is namespaced. There's a global called CMS, and in there's another, that's the namespace for all the variables, and there's a property on that, which is API, and then there's one for helpers. But show tooltip is what we needed for being able to set the tooltip for what we need. So that's just for setting the tooltip. So you can see as I scroll around, it says add project annotation. Well, that's not normal. That would only normally appear for a plugin, not for my own home-built thing, right? So I did want to add the tooltip for completeness, and we do have that. But to create the actual modal dialog from all of these defaults is up here. You can see I just created a variable called modal, and I'm calling, again, in that CMS namespace, something called modal, and this actually creates some JavaScript object which is it represents the modal dialog. Once you have that, then we can just call it with an open, and that's what opens it. And then there's a special variable in when you're declaring this, which is what do you do on close, right? So once the modal dialog is closed, what are you going to do with it? And I'm basically pulling that out of a custom attribute on the image tag called data-onClose, and that tells me what I want to do. And I'm going to look at that up here in a minute, well, right now. And we'll get a feel for some of the, okay, so here it is right here. And this is basically just saying when we close the dialog, we want to refresh the page, because when we close the dialog, it's presumably because we just created a new annotation, and so we want to refresh the page so that it's then drawn on the screen like all the others, and that's exactly what happens. So you can see it's only a few lines of JavaScript, and most of it is boilerplate. You know, all this stuff here is pretty much boilerplate, and the complements down here. And then there's just two blocks. One of them is about setting up the tooltip, and then there's the other one about, you know, basically deriving the defaults that you want to use, and then using those defaults in the modal. Oh, sorry. The other important thing is the URL that you're going to need for the modal dialog, and that's going to be an admin URL, just like you would use to pull up something in the sidebar, or, you know, straight up in a Django admin view. And I do actually calculate that in the view, and then I place it in the code as a so here it is right here, as a you know, as another custom attribute. So, you know, this is already determined in the view and then placed here. And this is the bit that includes the image. I think I was kind of fumbling around looking for that earlier. The URL, and I'll show you that in a moment. Well, I'll show it to you now. So in the detail view, what I'm saying is use admin reverse, which I don't know if you guys have noticed, but since about 3.05, instead of just using straight up reverse and then using an admin pattern, you really should be using admin reverse, and that enables us to abstract away the admin system away from, you know, the current implementation. But anyway, and then, you know, you provide the app underscore the model, and then in this case add for creating a new one. And then I'm just applying the app and the model as the parameters into this string formatter. And then it returns to me the URL. Now what I'm doing with that URL is that I put that into another format, a string formatter, where I include the actual project name. So that will automatically be set when I get to the modal dialog. It will already set the project that we're working with. So, so that's where we set the project. Where we set the image is, again, going back and forth on this, but I think it's in the template. And okay, so here's, no, that's not it. Somewhere. Okay, and so, oh, okay, what I do is I add the image key, or the ID, to the parameter. So I get that URL for how to edit that or create a new annotation, and I include another parameter. This time I'm using the ampersand instead of the question mark, and that includes the image. So putting this all together, basically I'm getting in the view, I determine which project I'm looking at, because that's a very natural place to do that, and I include that in the URL as a get parameter on the edit URL. And then I pass that into the template. The template, because there's multiple images that are all rendered at the same time in a loop, it makes it smart. You know, it's the appropriate time to render the image PK to the URL at template time. So I do that. And then in the JavaScript is where I'm picking up the offset left and top and left, and also I take a stab at picking left or right, and I include those as new parameters on the edit URL. Then I pass the whole edit URL, admin edit URL, or add URL in this case, to this modal object and open it, right? And so the result is here, and we can see, and we've already seen this, but now that you understand how we put it together, it'll be easier to understand. The project is still editable, but it was set as a default by including it on the URL in the view. The image was set in the template, and so was the point X and the point Y as default parameters to the add URL. And I think it comes together very nicely, and I find that I'm much quicker in setting up new projects that I've worked on because the annotations are not a headache to produce anymore. I can just make them pretty quickly. So what remains for me to do is give it a title, type in the annotation, and set what type it is, and then determine if it's going to be tweetable or not. So in my website, I can set some of the annotations to be tweetable, and then they'll be automatically tweeted on a kind of a random basis twice a day. So that's how that works. Does anybody have any questions about this before I move on to anything else? Let me switch back to you guys. All right. Oh, we have a few more people too. Hi everybody who came in since we started. I'm having trouble seeing anything. Is anybody still there? I see everybody's muted.
Yep, we're here.
Okay, cool. Does anybody have any questions about using that? Now, I would like to just say that this is an undocumented API, but it is one that the CMS heavily depends upon in order to present menus in the toolbars and also contextual menus for plugins, etc. When you're in edit mode. So it's not something that you're going to see a lot of documentation for, but I do think it's a powerful way to better integrate your custom interfaces into your projects, and I think it just helps everybody make a better impression on their customers.
So where is that CMS defined, the object? Where is it that defined where we could find it in the code and find its methods?
I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically. I mean, there is in the code base in the repo it would be under CMS/static, and then I think it's /CMS again, and then I think there's /JS, and then there's /modules, and I think that's where you'll find some of this stuff. To be honest, I didn't start finding this by looking at the code. What I did is I started by looking at the menus in an existing project, right? So, well, I don't want to switch to sharing screens right now, but you can see the kinds of data structures that are emitted in your markup and how that interacts with the JavaScript in your when you're in edit mode of any project, because the CMS has to do all that stuff anyway to present you menus and so on and so forth. So that's where I started, and then ultimately I did look into the code specifically to find the tooltip one, because it wasn't obvious to me how to do the tooltips, and I eventually did do kind of trawling through the code to find the tooltip API, which again, it's a private API, so it's kind of developer beware. If we make a big change on this, it may mess up your project, but it's been pretty stable since 3.0 was launched. I haven't seen any major changes to it. So, does that help, Mike?
Yeah, it did. Thanks.
Okay, super. Okay, so I was going to show you guys one more that I had done. I think I've actually talked about this before, but I don't know offhand. I think what I'm going to try to do is a split screen deal so that I can still see you guys. Because when I'm doing this, I don't see you guys anymore, and I'm not really sure if you're still there. Give me one moment. All right. Okay. So I was just showing you a project for a company called Intercoms based in Dallas. And I've just recently added a new feature. Now, the client has approved the feature, but we haven't actually launched it yet because we're still waiting on the designer to put their final acceptance in. So I currently have it sort of implemented, but it's only in draft mode right now. I haven't actually published the change, so I'm going to go in there so you guys can see it. All right, so you'll see when I logged in and I'm now in draft mode, there's this new gray area beneath the header, and if I switch back to live mode, you'll see it's not there. And probably later on today it will be published and there will be a new icon in there. But for right now, you'll just have to see it in draft mode. Switching to draft mode is taking a long time. Okay, so nothing terribly interesting about this, but let me just give you a little background about what this is. So periodically they have kind of one-off messages that they want to bring to their viewers' attention, and we're calling them news flashes. So they'll be able to create one or more news flash that if they create more than one, then they'll rotate, and they'll kind of fade out and fade in and rotate so that while you're looking at the home page, you can kind of get all the news flashes, right? And each one of these things are linked to anything of their choice. So this particular one is going to be linked to an external URL, but I also have it so they can link to basically any object in the CMS, and including any page in the CMS. And so that's a good way to direct people to new content, right? And if you don't have any news flashes defined, then this whole section just disappears and you don't see anything. Not very interesting. It was a very quick feature to produce for them. The interesting thing for you guys is that it was a struggle for me to know how to create a UI for this. So that they can manage their news flashes because of a couple reasons. One is this whole section may not even be here, so there will be literally nothing to click on, no way for them to add their first one. Now, in order to solve that particular problem, I did create one of these menus up here, and they'll be able to add a new item. They could also list all the items and edit them here, but I wanted to do, I wanted to go the extra mile. I wanted to make it as easy as possible. But when there are no news flashes shown, they will have to use this menu item to add one. Just because I don't think it's worth making any other way to do that at this time. But it already beats having to go back into the administration for Django to create a new one, right? It's already nice. So they can just come up here and add new item, right? So that's what that looks like. But once they've already got one or more of them here, if they want to remove them or if they want to add a new one, I did use that tooltip trick that I just showed you from my own website, and I created a little bit more functionality behind that tooltip. So on all of the items, I made it so you can double click, and what it will do is it will show you in a modal dialog. It will show you the list of all of the defined news flashes, and I'm just basically dumping the user into the list, the change list view for admin, but it's in a modal dialog. Now this is very unusual because I don't think the CMS does any list views at all in a modal dialog, but it is very possible to do. And I am using, again, these private JavaScript APIs to do it, but it's pretty straightforward. And I will show you that code in a moment. And so here you can see we can edit an existing one, or we can add a new one, do whatever we want, and then when you close, it will, in theory, it would refresh the screen. Actually, I think I turned that bit off for some reason, but I think it makes it a much more natural experience for their content editors to just double-click here. And the other thing is, if you watch very carefully, you can see that the tooltip changes. If I'm over the content, it says double-click to edit news flash items. But if I roll and I'm in the gray border area, it says double-click to edit the news flash section. And so I'm going to double-click that, and you can see this is something different. It's the actual. It's not really a plugin. This is something I've created, which is a section for the page. But it is kind of like a plugin that is responsible for displaying all this stuff. And the important thing for them to manipulate here is the duration in seconds that each one of these things will be displayed on the screen until they change. So again, it's another easy way for them to edit, not only the content of these news flashes, but how they're presented. And if I had other more global options about these new flashes, then I would put them into the section plugin, and they could edit them there. So let's have a look at some of this. I'm going to pull up the project code real quick and go to that section. News flashes. Okay, so here's the news flashes section plugin, and this is how everything is displayed. I don't think there's anything in particular useful here, except the change list URL, which I'm going to need later in the JavaScript. So just like I did before that I showed you, I am finding the change list, the admin change list view URL for the app and model, in this case news flashes and news flash. And I'm grabbing that URL and I'm putting that into the context so I can use it in JavaScript later in my templates. So that's the only thing that's interesting here. The only other thing is I do set a context variable called edit mode if and only if we are truly logged into the CMS and we have the edit mode showing. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of changes here. You can see the only thing I'm doing outside of that is setting the duration from that's stored in the instance of this section plugin. So it's a very basic plugin. So let's take a look at the template for the news flashes, and that's here. So you can see again at the bottom I have a bit of JavaScript. Now, by the way, most of you are probably familiar with doing, putting all your JavaScript into one file that's minified and having good front-end performance, and I do that. So throughout this project, all the JavaScript for all of these apps over here are all basically merged into one file and delivered as a single file. But I don't do that for these things like edit mode JavaScript, because first of all, it only affects the operator, right? Normal viewers are never going to see anything because they're never going to be logged in. I'm not even going to emit this if they're not logged in. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to roll that into my minification and compaction process. But anyway, so here we are with it's very similar to what we had before. I have a thing down here for the tooltip, so we can distinguish a tooltip for when we're rolling over the section versus when we're rolling over the actual content. And when we're rolling over the content, we're seeing news flashes items in the tooltip rather than the news flashes section. And then the important bit really is this modal. Again, I'm calling the modal object, and then I open it with the URL that I get from my view where I set the change list URL right here. Right here. And then I also have to pick up on close. Now, interestingly, I am pulling up refresh page again, but it didn't seem to do that. And maybe that's because I closed it with the X rather than close it with a save or even a cancel. That might be why it didn't refresh, which is fine because you can see it was taking a long time to do that anyway. It's fine for me right now. Anyway, so that's how I did this, and it's very similar to the last one I showed you, but I think you'll agree that it improves the editability in the CMS for the operators, I think greatly, and just creates a much better experience for everybody. So that's pretty much what I was going to show everybody today. Is there any questions about that? No? Okay.
I think it really makes the site a lot better for the users, especially where you can change the section part where you have the different newsflash or the newsflashes icon and the other one where you can change like which modal comes up and so on.
Yep. I agree.
The question is how would they edit the newsflash section if there is no newsflash?
Right. So what I am doing is I do provide that in this menu up here, so they can always go to this. They can actually edit the items here too, but it's not as contextually sensitive. But if the news flash section doesn't exist at all, then they do have to use this menu. Now we could be more creative, and it could be that if you're logged in, we show the news flashes section anyway, right? Even if it's empty, and then they can use the normal double click to create content. That's perfectly viable. In fact, I might have actually done that in this case. Let me just check my code because Okay. Yeah, okay. So you know what? That's what I'm doing here is I'm saying if newsflashes.count, meaning the number of news flashes that we're going to be showing, is greater than 0, effectively, or edit mode, then I do show the section. So that's exactly what I've done here, is that if you're logged in, you're going to see this gray area, even if there's no news flashes to show, and then you can always double click to add more. I don't want to show you that in practice because I'll have to delete this particular one, and I don't want to because then I'll have to re-enter it later because this is the one we're going to launch with. But yeah, so that's how I'm handling it in this case. Um, I very often do things like that. So I can very quickly show you another live site. I hope everybody's keeping this in confidence, you know, to whatever degree they can. So here's another project where I have what on the leadership page. You can see I'm already logged in because of my browser caching. So we have all these leaders in a grid, and I needed a way to make it easy for them to edit people even if they're not published yet, right? So what I did is I'm showing them all the ones that are published up here, and then at the very bottom I have this section here with this kind of striped background, and this is where I show them things that are not, the public cannot see, but they can still then double click them to edit these individual people. And in this case they don't have any photos, so like these ones here, they don't have photos, so they're just names and titles. But if I log out, you will not see that section, right? It's just something I do for the operators. And I encourage CMS developers to do those kinds of things because this doesn't require anything undocumented. It didn't require any undocumented JavaScript things to do. This is just straight, setting a variable in the view. If that variable's set, then I show a different, basically a different query set of people, and I style it with a different background. So that's very straightforward, and I encourage people to do that because it just brings the administration up to the front end and makes it a lot easier for people to use. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of customers, and a lot of them have experience with things like WordPress, right? And they do find WordPress easier to use than a standard Django project. And I consider it my duty and responsibility to change that, right? So I don't want my customers to say, well, it's easier to do in WordPress, why didn't you use that? And the response can't be, because I hate WordPress. It has to be something legitimate. What I want to do is avoid that discussion. And this particular customer for this project you're looking at now, Mercury LLC, they had a Drupal site before this, and they really find it to be a lot easier to manage than the Drupal site. And it's because I have these nice little features in there. And here's another one. So in this particular project, they have to, on the front page, there's something called, well, we call them snippets. And you can see this is a guy's portrait, and then we have some text. And you can see that the text kind of wraps around the portrait, right? Now I'm using some fancy JavaScript to do that, but in order for it to work, I have to have transparent images, right? So I'm asking my customer to upload transparent images and normal images of their staff. And I had a lot of problems with this very non-technical operator who didn't really know if her images were transparent or not. So what I did is, I'm going to show you this list here. I made a very visual change list view for her so that she can see very quickly. I apologize for the speed of the network. I think it might just be because of Google Hangouts. I'm not sure. So you can see I'm showing her all of the images that she's uploaded for each person, and she can very quickly go, ooh, I don't have a transparent image for this guy. Now there's these first two images look the same, but they're different sizes. Don't ask. But the last one here is the transparent image, and I actually am using CSS, and I'm using a custom kind of admin field to emit enough HTML for me to show the transparent image on a checkered background. So basically I'm drawing the checkered background behind the transparent image so that she can readily see that that's a transparent image and where is it transparent. Now this one obviously is done incorrectly, and maybe this one too. So anyway, yeah, so these little nice things I think really make a difference between a really delighted Django CMS customer and another one who may be less delighted. I think all of us in this room here know that Django is a lot more powerful than WordPress, and Django CMS is also a lot more powerful because we have the full power of Django behind it. But I think we can kind of all agree that WordPress is a little bit more finessed in its out-of-the-box experience for somebody who doesn't care about how powerful it is. They just care how easy it is to use. And like I said earlier, I really want to change that. I really want my customers to go, this is awesome. It's really doing everything I need it to do, and it's easier to use. So that's really what this is all about. This whole hangout today. And this is just another way to do that. And maybe some of you veterans are already doing these kinds of things, but I think probably not enough people are focused so much on the operator experience as much as they are on the visitor experience. So that's what I have to show you guys today. Does anybody else have anything that they want to share with the group? Not so much? Well, it looks like we lost a few people. I hope I didn't bore everybody. How you doing, Arnie?
He's muted.
You're muted. Thanks, Jonas and Tobias.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. You've unmuted your mic.
Okay. Martin, thank you very much. I have a question. How did you find out about these private APIs? Have you been told, or did you just figure it out?
Well, I mean, as one of the developers on the project, I find that over time I'm becoming more and more familiar with all of the code base. There are still bits of code base I haven't touched and I don't know anything about, but I have over the months I have become more exposed to the way that as I'm fixing bugs, somebody might complain that one of the plugin menus doesn't work or whatever, and post an issue, and I have to go hunt it down and figure out how to fix it, and I fix it, right? So I think probably over the months and after fixing some of the issues, I've kind of learned how some of these things work, and so I do have that advantage. But having said that, I think that even if I was going to start creating something like that without looking through the code base, there's plenty of clues there, right? So the CMS already presents menus, and when you click the menu, sometimes it goes to the sidebar, sometimes it goes into a modal dialog, and in both cases, you can see how through the configuration, through the markup, how it makes one do one and one do the other, right? So the clues are there. You just have to dig a little deeper, and I totally get it. If I haven't been using CMS and I'm not really 100% confident in how it works, I would be lost. But like I said, over the months, I've become more familiar with this stuff and more confident in my understanding of how it works, and therefore I knew that there was something there, and I could exploit it, so I did. I hope that helps.
So you are very much engaged in developing Django CMS itself.
Oh yeah, Arnie, I didn't know you didn't realize I'm one of the core developers of the project.
I see.
So this particular talk that I do every month is not an official anything. It's just me. And I've said this next thing a few times. When I first started with Django CMS about three and a half years ago, I found it very difficult to learn because at the time I had never used Python, I'd never used Django, so I certainly didn't know Django CMS, and I didn't really know where the boundaries between Python and Django were, and where the boundaries between Django and Django CMS were. So I was very lost. And if you search for my name in Stack Overflow and look at some of my earlier posts, you can see I'm basically just shouting at the top of my lungs saying, I need some help with Django CMS. I don't know where to find it. And I think because of that, I've taken it upon myself as I'm becoming more familiar with it to help other people and ease that transition so it's less frustrating with other people. And that's why I do these talks every month. Yep. I've done other things, creative UIs. Let's see, there's another one that I was thinking about showing. Let me see if I can remember it. Oh yeah, let me show you this other one that you might get a kick out of. First of all, let me make the screen smaller. In this Intercoms project, so I mentioned earlier that I have this plugin is really a section. So just to explain how this works, so this website is actually not a one-pager anymore, but it was originally designed to be a one-pager. Now, if you guys are familiar with that or not, a one-pager is basically everything is on this one page, all the information that you would need for the company. Now, since we've created it, we have started creating subsequent pages, but let's just pretend it's a one-pager. Somebody has an echo. Arnie, could you mute your microphone again? Or maybe I can do it. Okay, perfect. So so the idea was this was going to be a one-pager, and that this menu, which you see here, normally on a web page you click a menu and you go to another page, but all of this needed to be just for the one-pager. So if I were to click on About, then I go down to the About section, right? So instead of going to another page, I'm going to another section on the same page. And since I knew I was going to be creating lots of sections and it had to be integrated with this menu, I really needed a way to automate that so that my customer, after I'm gone and when they're trained, which they're not trained yet, when they are though, they may want to move some of these things around. They might like to have the services thing first, before the About. So what I did is I made it so in order to do something like that, they would just go into structure mode, and then they would open up the section container, and they could move the sections around. And when they do, the menu would automatically update to show how that works. Now, it's kind of complicated, and I don't want to explain how that works today. But in going through this process, I really kind of forced myself to think beyond the simple plugins that you can do with Django CMS, which are, the Google Maps plugin and the Flash plugin and the Link plugin, and start thinking about how plugins can really help you with structuring your site. So each one of these things here is a section plugin. So most of them you can see are a generic section, and if I were to double click this, you can see most of the same options. It has a title, it has a label, and it has a slug, and I have some checkboxes for, do I want to display the title or not, or do I want to show it in the menu or not. They all inherit from the same base plugin, so they all have those basic options. Now, you remember when I opened up the news flashes, I had those same options, but I also have this duration one, right? So that's because they all inherit from the same section plugin that I made. It's really made managing the site and building the site a lot easier. So you can see most of these are using the same generic section plugin, but there are a few that have some custom stuff in. And the one I want to talk to you guys about...
Screen.
Oh, sorry. So you guys are probably lost. All right, so let me share the screen and I'll try to continue. Okay. Can you guys see it now?
Much better.
Okay, so sorry, let me repeat that last bit. So I'm in structure mode on this website I was showing earlier. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you again. So you remember this when we were looking at it. And you'll remember that when I was in here and I double clicked on the gray area, we had this section come up and it has these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These first 5 things that you can do are all, remember these, right? And then we have the duration, which is kind of specific to this particular one. If I were to go to the About section and double click anywhere, see it says double click to edit generic section. I have the same options, right? And that's because all of these section plugins all inherit from the same base plugin, and I'm going to show you that right now. So this is over here, and I just basically well, I tried to create this in a way that could be abstracted very nicely. So this is the basic section plugin, container plugin. Now the container plugin is basically the first thing that I add. I'm going to go back to structure mode real quick, and you can see all of this stuff. Oops, all of this stuff is sitting inside a section container, right? The section container is configured to be a plugin that only accepts certain specific other plugins, and those plugins happen to be my section plugins, right? So the section container is special, and it is this which ultimately displays my menu at the top, right? So this was designed to look through all of the different plugins that are here and render them, but also pull out some metadata from each one of those plugins and then display the menu, which I realize now I haven't even shown you yet because the screen wasn't showing. So here's the menu at the top, and it's basically listing all of the plugins that I created and added to the container, the section container. So each one of these is a section plugin. And you can see them here. So if my customer decides, hey, I really want my industries to be above impact, they can just drag and drop it up there. The menu will automatically show it in the right order, and the content will be in the right order. So it's a very nice experience for them. The one I wanted to show you guys is the approach. So let me show you what that looks like on the site. I'm gonna zoom down to the approach section, or actually I'll use the menu so you can see that works. Approach. Okay. So here's this approach, and it's a very unique design. I'm not the designer for this project, but it has this fly-in effect. So when you get to it, it kind of zooms in all these headings, just to add a little bit of dynamicism to the site. And each of these are clickable. So this one is the current active one, and it shows this content over here. We have this one over here. You click it, and we got some new content, and same here. Here and here. Now this one here you can see has images in it, and these are even interactive, okay? And this is an entirely separate plugin inside this approach plugin, which is inside this section, which is inside the container. So you can see I have very nested plugins here, which are not only helping me manage the content, but also the structure of that content and the navigation therein. So I wanted to show you guys this because it presented a unique challenge. When you have plugins like this one and the news flashes one at the top that conditionally shows content. So in this case, you know, it only shows you the content of the menu item you've selected. How do I edit the content on some of these other ones, right? So there's two things you have to manage. There's the content itself, which is actually in a text plugin. So I can now double click this and I can see, you know, I can manage the text. But if I wanted to manage the title of this, that's not displayed over here. That's displayed over here, and that's not really part of the. It's hard to explain, but it's basically the problem I ran into is because I'm hiding all this stuff except the one that's shown, that's selected. I was left with no way to manage the titles of these plugins. And I actually created a new tag in the CMS, which is now, if it's not already in, it will be in 3.1. I think it's in 3.1, but it's a pretty simple one. You can very easily copy it to your project and use it, which allows you to present the hot area for this plugin, which is actually over here. And I present that plugin over here so that you can double click the plugin here and edit the content. And so you can see by double clicking this, I was able to edit the title. Oops, actually not. Yeah, so I'm able to edit the title, or I could disable it if I chose. And that's part of the parent plugin, right? It's not the content of the plugin, it's the parent plugin. And that's what I was left with no way to edit. So this actually right here is a special template tag, which allows me to basically place the hot area for front-end editing for a plugin in a different place, if that makes any sense. I think if you ever get in that situation, you're going to go, I know exactly that problem and I need the solution, and the solution exists, or at least it will exist in 3.1 coming up. I tried to get it into 3.09 or 3.010, which should be released soon, but we've determined that that is a new feature, and new features will go in 3.1 we're not going to put them into the support release for 3.0. But it will be there in 3.1, and there's nothing that stops you from copying that bit of code and putting it right in your project should you need it. So this is a common problem for me, when, especially if my designer comes to me and says, hey, I have this unique interface like this one, where some of the content is hidden, and I want you to make front-end editing capabilities. It presents a challenge in any CMS, and I'm very pleased that there is a way to do it in Django CMS now. And I'm actually going to show you that code in a minute. But while I'm still on the subject of hidden content and how do you edit it, I want to again show you the newsflash section. By the way, the newsflash section, I've turned off the menu because they wanted that to just be part of the top section. So even though it's a separate section, I turned off the menu, and it just basically follows the top section. So if I go to About, which is the second section, it will scroll off the page, or if I go to Top, then you'll see it right underneath the top section. Just like the client wanted, so I was quite pleased. So anyway, this is another condition where you could have 10 different news flashes, and it's only going to show one at a time. So how do you do front-end editing for that? I didn't want to have to make them wait for the one that they want to edit to appear, and then they have a 5-second window to click it or not, and if they miss it, they have to wait 50 more seconds before they can click it again. That doesn't seem like a starter to me. So that's why I opted to use the very non-standard mechanism, which is going to show the whole list of all of them, so they can edit anyone they want as they want to. Okay, so let's go look at the code that I did for that special template tag to enable the approach. Now approach, I think I put that into, I think it was called slide group. Nope. I don't remember, content group. I think this is it. So yeah, that's unique navigation that I showed you with the blue things that fly in, and then you can click them to enable content. Internally I'm calling that a content group, and this is the tag that I'm using, and this is now going to be in 3.1, but it was made specifically for this project, and it's still in this project because this project doesn't use 3.1, it uses 3.09. And this is it here. So basically it just acts like a render model block, which you probably have used before, but it allows you to disconnect it from the actual plugin and put it anywhere on the page you want. And this is it. You could copy this, but to be honest, there's a better version of it now in the new 3.1, and you should probably get it from the GitHub repo. It'll be cleaner. But this would work if you want to use it as well. And you can see I put a note in here that I've contributed this to the project. And then I'm going to show you the template for this particular thing, and you can see how I'm using it. So I call it the render plugin block, and when I'm rendering, so this is the container. This is just a helper template, which basically allows me to stuff all of well, it stuffs whatever I'm wrapping into here, and then wraps it with some custom markup. So don't focus on that too much, but I think the container is what I'm going to want. So in here I should have a loop, yeah, okay, for child and children, and then I loop around and render plugin block. Maybe this is it. Okay, so here I'm calling the render plugin block around. Now you can see this is two loops. There's a loop over here where I basically draw the blue bars, or the blue and gray bars, that you can then click on to activate. And then down here is where I'm actually rendering the content of those plugins. So this was my main problem, right? But by having this tag here, I was able to render the titles for all of these plugins over here and separately wrap them with the front-end editing capability. And then I didn't wrap these ones. So you don't double-click to edit these. You don't double-click to edit the plugins here, but you can now double-click to edit the children plugins inside there, and it works out really nicely. I don't know if this particular navigation style is particularly great. I think a lot of people would, UX experts would probably say it's not that great, but it's what they wanted, so we gave it to them, and and it required a little bit of extra thought about how we enable front-end editing, and it worked out really well. So I can now edit here to edit the actual plugin for this single item, and then that leaves this area over here free for me to double click to edit the actual content, just to repeat myself a little bit there. Let's see, I wonder if I'm doing anything else clever like that. This is complicated because it's using Bootstrap 3 and it's all flexible for no matter how many people they have, but I don't think I had to do anything non-standard, so not really worth showing. And same with down here. I mean, you can double click to edit a location here, or if you go off of the location, you can double click to edit the location section, which will again contain these common options because it's basically it extends the standard my standard section plugin. And I think I was about to show you that, and I think I got distracted. So let me go back to that. Sections. I do have the container plugin defined here, and then down here I have the base section plugin, but it's abstract. So this is basically where I put all the capabilities. And then I defined a very simple one at the bottom, I think, which was the generic section plugin. Although I don't see it here. Maybe that's what this one's called. This is unnamed section. Well, somewhere I have a generic one defined, and that's the one I use. And then the model is also abstracted and then carried around. Basically just defines all of those options, you know, whether or not we're going to show the title, what is the label, etc. And those are all defined here. So just so you'll know, also in 3.1, actually in 3.09, we have legitimized the ability to have abstract plugins and the ability to extend a plugin with another plugin. Before 3.09, that wasn't really possible. I mean, it was possible, but a lot of warnings would come up and complain because I think in a previous version of the CMS, it was absolutely not possible. But it is possible now, and in fact, I encourage it because it allows you to abstract, you know, like any other code you're writing, allows you to properly manage your code and create, you know, abstract base classes and extend them as required. And that was very useful in creating this. And in fact, again, that's another change we made to the CMS, specifically because of this project. Is I wanted to do this, I was doing it, it worked, but it was throwing all these spurious errors, so I fixed that. And I think if not in 3.09, those errors should be cleaned up for 3.010. It was one of the earlier things that we did for this release coming up. So yeah, this particular project is it's not the best looking project I've ever worked on. It definitely has some design oddities, but it is very responsive, which I think is pretty cool. So you know, if I were to be on a mobile phone, you can see everything flows very nicely to work. And I do have some conditional, so like before these were horizontal and now they're vertical. This is Bootstrap stuff here. But I'm really pleased with the ability for the CMS to adapt to whatever interface I dream up to make all this stuff possible. I'm able to get the CMS to support me. And anyway, I just want to really encourage people to you know, think also about the operator. Don't just think about the visitor. I'm repeating myself now, so. Anything else anybody wants to see on this before I stop sharing my screen? No? Okay. Oh, did I miss it? Go ahead, Arnie. You're muted again. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Could you tell something about the structure of the project? It seems to me you have not a kind of standard setup. You have a modified setup, and I would be interested in this the overall structure of the project and why you did it the way you did it.
Do you mean with the single page, the single scrolling page?
No, no. The black area on the left, the structure of your project.
The code?
The code, the code set up?
Okay. Well, the code setup is actually pretty straightforward. This is how I set up most of my projects. Actually, this is the wrong one. I'm gonna close that one. I almost always set up my what I usually do when I set it up. I'll use the Django CMS installer, and I'll give it a name and a directory which are the same. That makes it a lot easier for me. Basically, when I set up projects, I do a lot of projects, right? So in each project, I give each project a short name. In this case, that short name is intercoms. And I use that short name for many things, including the parent folder and the project folder. But inside the project folder, I'll usually set up an apps directory, and I'll build all my little apps that I need to support the project as discrete items inside of there.
Just let me ask you.
Okay.
The step folder you have within within your app, the single app projects, app applications. Is that right?
Yeah, inside the apps folder, I will create one or more apps usually.
The templates, you have just one templates directory, but you have several static folders, each for
Each project.
App.
Yeah, that's very common. That's very common in Django projects. Is you have a base project template folder, and here's where I define all my page templates, right? But then each app, like for example the sections app, which actually doesn't, it's never rendered by itself, right? It's always extended. Oh, here's the generic section, by the way, up here. But this is actually kind of a behind-the-scenes app, but it contains its own templates for the sections themselves. And then, so the generic one will have its own templates on top of that and actually override. So this one will probably inherit or extend, yeah, from the sections section base, and is used to display the plugin, which is called generic section, right? So I like to keep everything together. And I mentioned earlier that I usually will compress and merge all of my JavaScript together. So you can see I'm going to go to, well, the news flashes since it's so new. I'll show you that one. So I have a static folder here, and inside here I have news flashes, and then I have scripts. So here's where I keep my JavaScript. Now my tool which I use, which is called CodeKit on the Mac, to do all my compression and minification, happened to create a minified version, but I don't use this. In fact, I need to disable that. I haven't yet. What happens is I have a master script file, which is down here in my project static, which is basically, it's like a, I don't know, kind of like a front end. So I'm going to show it to you right now. So basically this is my script, my master script folder file, and basically it's just a bunch of imports, right? So I import all of my projects, my apps, scripts files. So the end result is they're all, every time I edit one of these, my CodeKit will automatically recompile and recompress, basically, you know, get all of these and concatenate them together and then minify the whole thing. And so that way, you know, I only have one script file that my visitors have to download, and it just makes it nice and easy to manage. So if I add a new app, I just come in here and add a new import statement, and that way I can keep my JavaScript with the app. You know, I'm just kind of being object-oriented here, really. So this app contains everything it needs to be replicated, and that's really important because if I do another project and I want to bring this news flashes app into that new project for a completely different customer, you know, it's not gonna be exactly the same, but I probably will have the same JavaScript functionality. So I'll just carry that with that folder. So when I copy and paste it into a new project, it's ready to go, you know. So it just makes it nice and encapsulated is the right word, I think.
Could you please show me your settings file?
I don't know if I should. This is being recorded and it has passwords in it. Is there anything in particular you want to see?
I just wonder how you did it, because I sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable what to do and how to do it.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know.
Yeah, so I think the important thing for you is, you know, how do you set it up so that you can put your apps in an apps folder. So just so you know, in my settings file, when I'm setting up my installed apps, I'll have all my normal stuff. I'll have like admin sortable and CMS and all the other things that I need. And then what I'll do is I'll have at the bottom a section where I import all my projects apps, and those will be imported as follows. So it'll look like something like intercoms dot apps dot in this case news flashes. So that's how I'll import them. So one after the other, I'm importing each one like this, and they work.
Okay.
So I think that's what you were after, and I'm happy to show it to you that way rather than show you my passwords. So I recognize that there are people of different levels of experience in the room. So if there's anybody has any other questions at whatever level, shoot them at me.
Well, Arnie kind of brought up a point about the settings file and the best practice.
Okay.
The difference between production versus development environments versus staging environments.
I will show you that.
Yeah, do you have your best practice that you like for that type of setup for your settings file?
So yeah, I usually make a settings module, a separate file, a folder with a init py in it, and then I set up base. This is local dev. It's this is where I put all my stuff so that things work locally, and then I have production. So basically everything like installed apps and things like that will be in my base, and then these two things here will have only the things that override that, such as my database settings, or like when I'm in production mode, I'm going to be using micro WSGI, so I have some special settings for that. In particular, I have when you're running in production mode, you have to have allowed IPs, I think. There's a special stanza you have to have in your settings when you're running in production mode to allow special domains or something like that. And that's going to be in there in my production settings one. Also, I often use something called Image Diet, I think. And Image Diet is a tool which will, when somebody uploads an image, it will automatically like minify it. Not necessarily compress it again, but it basically pulls out all the wasted space in the image. And my local setting, my local configuration, which is a Mac, has different options that are available to it than on my Linux server. So again, I'll have different settings in my local dev versus my production. It makes it a nice way to separate those concerns. Also, locally, I don't have to have a oh yeah, I do actually. I have a what is it? There's a hash. I forget. Every project has its own hash. I forget what it's called offhand. And locally, I'll have a different one than I do for production. Now, in production, it's actually not in my settings file at all. It's actually pulled in from a file off a file system on my. And I've actually never seen that code. Do you guys all know what I'm talking about? Every project has its own little hash in it.
The secret key.
The secret key, yeah. So when I go to production, I never even see it. Basically, I create it directly into a file, which I've never seen and never moored or viewed, and it has very strict permissions that only Django, the user Django, can read it. I know that particular key is probably not as sensitive as I'm giving the amount of attention to, but nonetheless, it's a good practice, I think. So it basically comes right off the disk, and I've never seen it. But locally, I've seen it. It's directly in my local dev settings file. So it just gives me it affords me that capability, so that when I'm in production. Oh, and just so you'll know, what I do is in my manage.py, I'm directly calling local dev, right? And then in my WSGI, I configure it to directly call production. So it's really easy to set up that way. It does require a little bit of extra work to have the extra settings module, in particular the path change, because in a normal, like in your default Django installation, settings is not in a module, it's in a separate file, and the paths have to be adjusted by one when you put it into a module. because everything is relative to where the settings file is. So that's one thing you have to pay attention to.
I have a question. In your development environment and production environment, do you use different databases or always the same? For instance, in the local development, you use SQLite, and in production.
I happen to use MySQL on both, but they definitely are separate. So when I'm doing development work, I don't put production database at risk by any stretch. Django does a really good job of keeping the same functionality between databases. So I could use SQLite or Postgres locally or remotely. I think I could reasonably mix and match them as required. But if I was doing anything that was, like if I was doing any embedded SQL in my ORM commands, I would probably want to stick with the same type of database, because once you start writing your own SQL, you're pretty much going to be writing database-specific SQL. But if you're using all the regular, database operators, I think you'd be fine to mix and match them.
Do you use continuous integration, or how do you deploy?
Okay, when I deploy, basically what I do is I set it up so that when I commit and then I do a git push to what I call hub, which is the deployment machine, and then it automatically deploys that code. So I have basically a git hook that on push, it will automatically do a collect static, it will push static out to the proxies, and then it will reset the WSGI runner. So it's real easy for me. I know a lot of people use Fabric, and I have used Fabric before, and it's basically pretty nice, but it requires a little bit of setup. But once you get it set up, it's pretty nice. I would say that if I was doing bigger projects than corporate websites like this, I would probably use Fabric. But for what I'm doing, the kind of work that I'm doing, like these two projects that I showed you, my Git deployment method works really well.
Have you experienced with Team City on JetBrains?
I haven't. I don't know anything about it. Now, just so you'll know, I do other work for bigger projects, and in those bigger projects I do use Fabric, and I do have different deployment methods. But for projects of this size, this is what I use.
You do unit testing in those kind of smaller projects?
Yes. In fact, I'm working right now on a bunch of even just apps like here in this. You see, I'm doing some apps for this project. I don't do unit testing on something like this. It doesn't really pay off for me. But in the bigger projects that are going to have longer life cycles and more developers working alongside you, I do absolutely use unit testing, and I require it, and I do use continuous integration. So, excuse me, I'm very familiar with Travis CI, and I'm also very familiar with Coverage, which is another web service, and I use them, and we try to make sure we have 80% or better test coverage at all times. Like anything that we work on that's going to be part of this CMS ecosystem is going to be using continuous integration, and it's going to be using test coverage, and we write unit tests for sure. Because it's always going to have multiple people, and I may not be there tomorrow to guard the repo, right? Somebody else might come in and want to do a commit, and they may be doing something very specific to their use case, but we want to make sure that they're not going to break things for everybody else. So tests are very important, I think, in open source.
Yeah, definitely. But maybe in those kind of smaller projects, like that one, it's not giving that much.
Yeah, it's not like this news flashes that I showed you. The customer wants it done, and they want it done quickly. In fact, they want to have it live tomorrow, and it will be. It took me 6 hours from start to finish to make it. Now that actually seems like a long time considering what it is. It's a very simple model. I can show it to you. I think Mike Cohn was asking to see it in more detail. So I'll show you some of this. It's actually a pretty simple app. So here's the models. Very simple. I have a mandatory label so that they know which one they're editing, and then they have content. The part that's trickier, you can see that I'm inheriting from something called linkable. Now that is something that I've written for this project for other things, and basically it allows them to automatically link one of these news flashes in this case to it's for basically capturing, creating hrefs, right? So when we display these news refs, they're all linked to something. They can link it to one of their press releases, one of their case studies, any of the CMS pages, or any arbitrary external link. And since I'm doing that in multiple places in this project, I just abstracted it all away into linkable.models. Linkable. I'll show you that now in a minute. So other than this, and the fact that it's using sortable, admin sortable, it's a pretty straightforward model, right? So by inheriting from these two things, I'm automatically going to get order, which is another table, another field from this, and then linkable is going to give me like 5 or 6 fields depending on what I want to link to. But this is pretty simple to do, and then down here is the plugin, the section plugin for news flashes, and you can see this is where I'm adding the duration to the normal set of configuration options for a section. But again, I'm inheriting from an existing abstract model, in this case the section-based plugin model, which gives me the title, whether or not I'm going to show the title, etc., etc. So this is pretty straightforward. And then I do have a form here. Now the form is part of really the linkable stuff, and I haven't really abstracted this away. But this is where I can define, when they double-click the plugin, this is where they can set what they're going to link to. And it is a little bit complicated, but the complicated part is down here where I'm presenting a list of all the different content types that they can link to, whether it's a CMS page or a press release or a case study. And both those latter two things, the case studies and the press releases, are actually app hooks. So they're not actually app CMS pages, but they do have a CMS representation through an app hook. But that's why I don't include that in the same category as CMS pages. But anyway, so this basically assembles a drop-down list, and it has to do it in a way that it can deassemble later, so it can figure out what the content type ID is and the specific item ID is. And you can see I'm doing some regex here to parse that out. So it's a little bit complicated, and it's really way beyond the scope of me trying to show you how it works here. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, I do have basically this code is lifted out of a project I've already published, which is called django CMS styled link, I think, and it's on my GitHub repo and it's completely public. That's a little bit more of a self-contained thing, but it allows you to create. It's like a link plugin replacement that allows you to connect to content types that you've defined in your project. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, absolutely pull that in. Now what I've done is I've grabbed some of that code and made it very project specific. So this is a very simple plugin. I have a simple model, as I just showed you. I do have a form just to handle all the linkable stuff. Here's the toolbar definition, also very simple. Admin, very simple. Nothing really private or secret there. And the templates, which I think I've already showed you. Maybe I did. Yeah, I did early on in this call. I showed you this template. Basically, I'm just looping through, emitting them all, and then I use JavaScript to cycle them on using the duration that I defined in the plugin. So it's pretty straightforward. Now let me show you the linkable stuff. Again, this is just the model. The only thing I abstracted away is the model, and it has a lot of code at the front of the model to basically have this configuration here where I come in here and I say I want everything that's linkable to be able to talk to case studies, CMS pages, case studies, and press releases. And I just basically give it the class path of the model, and I can provide filters. So in each case, I'm saying that they have to be published. So up here for the CMS pages, the filter means that it's not draft. But for these two, I'm looking for a published flag. and then I have a bunch of code to make sure that this configuration is valid for the runtime, and I don't really want to go through it, but you can, again, it's basically pulled right out of that project that is referenced that I published earlier. And basically it just goes through and makes sure that all that stuff is legit, and also creates lists of these things so that they can be presented when they need to be presented. And then down here is the actual model, and heavily dependent on content types, which if you're not familiar are very powerful, allows you to create foreign keys that point to any content type you want, which is precisely what I need here. And so that's what I'm doing. And then it allows you to create a generic foreign key. And then that's if you want to link to a press release or a case study or a CMS page. But what if you want to link to an external? Well, I also have a URL field, and they can type in any arbitrary external URL, and that'll handle that. And then I have some options here for targets. So if if you want to link it to the same window or a new window or whatever, it's just a nice little thing. And I don't have it here for this project, but I also used to have a thing where it would tie in with your SEO, and you could, on external links, you could mark it so that it was no rel, so it would basically tell Google not to index the external links, but I don't have it for this project. And then I have some helper methods in here for determining what type of a link it is, whether it's a download. Oh, by the way, I also have download support up there, so you can upload a file with Filer, and it will link directly to that file download if you want. And then ultimately it has this item URL. Now in the actual models that inherit from this, I define get absolute URL, which points directly to this. Basically, it just says return whatever this returns, and that and then I can use that for the actual link. So it's pretty cool. I like the linkable, and I use it in a lot of projects. And like I said, if you're interested in it, go check out the project that I referenced. In fact, I'll just pull it up real quick so you guys can see it. Where's my browser? Oh, right here. Duh. GitHub. So I feel a little bit. I try not to focus on my own work here, but since we brought it up, I'll show it to you. But in general, I don't want these to be about all my work. Yeah, okay, Django CMS styled link right here. And there's even a little animated GIF at the bottom that shows you what it does. So basically it gives you the option of creating, in this case, an internal destination, and when you click the drop down, it shows you different content types, which you can see here are CMS pages, portfolio pieces in this case, and solutions. This is all mocked up, but this is what it allows you to do. So that's that.
Really, really nice.
Cool. Glad you like it. Hope you find it useful. Please take it and fork it and make something even better. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and I will probably improve it over time, but I'm sure you guys have great ideas too.
It says the code's test with Python 2.7 and Django 1.6. Do you know if it works with Python 3?
I've actually just started my Python 3. I'm starting to code everything in Python 3. I don't know if that particular project was done in 3.3 or 4, and it may need a little bit of updating. But I'll tell you, it's not going to be hard because now that I've been converting a number of projects from older Django's and Pythons to newer ones, it's not that hard. It's pretty straightforward. And if you want to use the styled link plugin, which I just showed you, and it's not supporting 3.4, just open up an issue, and I'll probably fix it and push it out. Or you can submit a PR, and make it more of a community effort. Yeah. How about you guys? You guys have any projects you worked on over the last month or so, and want to show it off? No? All right. So who do we have in here? So everybody's got icons here. Okay, we have Tobias. Hi, Tobias. You have a microphone that works? I guess not. All right. Where do you hail in from, Tobias? Where are you from? Lost my headset. Somewhere. Germany. Okay, we have a lot of Germans that use Django CMS, and I have a lot of projects that I do for German customers using CMS. Mike, I know you're from Georgia, the state, not the country. We have 3 mics, so I should probably be more specific. And then we have Mike Mikhailo, I think he's from Ukraine, and we have another Mike. I don't know where he's from.
Yeah, I live in California,
Oh, hey, great,
at UC Davis.
awesome. What do you use? What do you use? Are you using it for the university there?
So I work in a lab doing bioinformatics, and
Cool.
so I do lots of various projects. And what I'm working on now is like making a lab website that is more than just like having a few things that face outward, but like where like everyone in the lab can manage the content and have something that's more like a living thing instead of just made once and never looked
Forgotten.
at again.
Yeah. So how far along are you on that project?
So I'm fairly new to Django and Django CMS. I actually I've made a couple apps in just Django, and for example, like a lab members one, sort of like your leadership one.
Okay.
I mean, not as fancy, but just so that people can enter their information. And then I'm working with Django CMS to try to make it so that it's easier to have like pages about different projects, people working on sub projects.
So it sounds like it's all about knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I wish you all the best of luck on that, and naturally, if you have something you want to show to the team, we would love to see it. But it sounds like you're not quite ready yet. But when you're
Maybe in a couple months, definitely. I actually just spent some time trying to move from development to production environment, and that was quite a hassle because we were stuck on a Debian machine, and so like a lot of things are out of date compared to what I wanted to be using, and so like lots of manual installation of stuff, and it was my first time using like Postgres, and yeah, it was a challenge, but now
learning curve.
working.
But you know what? If you didn't like learning curves, you wouldn't be studying informatics right now, right?
Yeah.
So great. Yeah, I feel for you. Like I said earlier in the call, when I first started using all this stuff, I'd never used Python, Django CMS. It was all a big blur for me, and just sieving all that stuff out into different buckets was a big part of the challenge. I feel for you, and I hope that having these talks are helpful to you because I felt really lost early on. It was trial by fire for me. Super. And you're Mike Covington, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so the answer to your question that you put in the little chat window there is yes, that's the correct repo.
Got it.
Alrighty. All right, guys. Well, who else has got something? Tobias is asking if you're using something for scaffolding your projects. Not really. For a while, I played around with the idea of using. I mean, I know that you can with Django admin, you can set up scaffolding, and when you create a project, it will automatically create a bunch of stuff for you. I started doing that, and then I decided that my methods and my best practices changed so often that it was actually getting in my way. As not only best practices, but just as I learn, I quickly figure out that what I had encoded in my scaffolding is not really the right way to do things. So, just as I was learning and as things change, and also, things change from one version of Django to the next. So the scaffolding will have to be rebuilt. And I just found myself spending more time on my scaffolding than on my project. So I don't really need it that much. I mean, I have I do Django CMS installer, which is like makes it super easy to make a running installation. And then the first thing I usually do, because I'm one of the developers, is I uh, I uninstall CMS. I use the Django CMS installer to get a working Django project with Django CMS, and then I uninstall CMS and I install the latest developed release, right? And then because for me, what I find is that if I start a project with the latest developed release, then by the time that I'm ready to go live with that project, then probably that version of the CMS is also ready to go live. And it just makes, it also helps me to know if there's any bugs in the current version, and then I focus on fixing them. But so that's just me. I just usually use the installer, set it up, and then run with it. I think I started to say earlier in this talk that I make a short code word for every project, and I use that for a number of things. So like you saw the intercoms example. So intercoms is the short code word that I use for the project, and so that means my virtual env is called intercoms. My database called intercoms. My folders across the development. So in my directory structure where I keep all my Django projects, it's called intercoms. So that was one of the things that really simplified my life. And the reason I do that, A, because I'm lazy, and B, because all my deployment scripts that I use, like sometimes I have scripts that so somebody asked me earlier, how do I deploy? And I do use Git for code and for statics. But for media and the database, right, if I'm actually going to push my local database out to production, like when I'm first deploying the project, I have a script that does it. So I have a script that I wrote. It's just a shell script, and it copies up the database, and it also copies all the media from the media folder. And so when I get ready to do a new project, that script is the same script, but I just changed the code word from one thing to intercoms, and then it's ready to go. I might have to put in a new password here and there, but yeah. So that's what I do. I mean, I do a lot of projects, and that works really well for me. If I was doing this just once, if I was Mike Covington and I was doing, probably one project for my university, then I wouldn't go through that much trouble. I would just, do it however I want to do it all the time. So what else for scaffolding? Like I mentioned before, Fabric, if you do larger projects with a larger team and you want to do something a little bit more robust than the collection of scripts I just told you, I do recommend you look at Fabric. It works really nicely with SSH and so on and so forth. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Tobias? Awesome. All right. Well, great. As I mentioned earlier in the call, and I don't know if some of you had come into the call after I had made this announcement and went full screen and didn't see that you came in. I was recording this whole session and to video, and I will post it to YouTube for other CMS users. I may edit out the beginning of it where I was just basically chatting with Mike Cohn for a little while. And but other than that, it's going to go verbatim. Which is why I was also resistant to show you my settings files, because I didn't want that to be encoded on YouTube of all places. Does anybody object to that? Does anybody prefer that they were not published on YouTube? Okay. I will accept your silence as acceptance that you will be published on YouTube. Thank you. All right, cool. Well, announcements. Let me cover some announcements. So I am the release manager for 3.010, which is coming up. We rotate who the release managers are, and I happen to be it for 3.010. And I have a current goal of getting 3.010 released this week. I think I might be slipping a little bit because today's already Thursday, and I still have 4 open tickets. But I'm thinking probably over the weekend or maybe early next week we will see a new version of Django CMS 3.010. What it contains are a number of fixes for sure, and of course we'll have the proper release notes. I don't know if it has any specific features. because because it is on the 3.0 support branch, we are trying to keep the features out and just focus on bugs. I do know there's some documentation improvements as well. 3.1 is shaping up. I think that will be here before April, or maybe even sooner. I think we'd prefer to have I think we're trying to get an alpha release together. That's definitely going to have some new stuff in it. That template tag that I showed you for my intercoms project that I made is going to be 3.1, but that's really minor compared to the other awesome stuff we have there. I know that we have a faster implementation of the multipath traversal tree. This time we're using Treebeard instead of MPTT. That's going to be in 3.1. We also have, because we've replaced that, we've also, and I'm using the word we very loosely here, a number of our other developers have worked very hard on 3.1, including Yaki. So we have a lot of stuff in there for the MPTT replacement, and that was actually done by Patrick Lauber, who was the original developer for CMS, but he's been less active lately. We also have massive test coverage improvement. So we were talking about test coverage earlier. So CMS is going to go from, I think we're in the 60s in test coverage, and we're going to go well into the 80s or 90s in 3.1, and we're going to try really hard to stay up there. So we hope to have more confidence from release to release that we're not introducing any regressions, etc. We're also going to have a fix for CMS plugin creation. So I think I mentioned this last month, but if you weren't here. So in the current release of the CMS, if you're on your page and you want to add a plugin, but you change your mind before you save it, that plugin is actually created already. It's already in your database, right? It just doesn't have the new settings that you decided not to add. And that's really not the way it should work, right? It should be that you're presented with a dialog, and then if you save it, then it gets saved. Otherwise, you don't have a plugin. And that was causing actual problems before, where you might change your mind, or maybe you had a system failure, or your browser closed for whatever reason, and you never got to finish the plugin. Well, that thing would be lingering around in your database, and in certain circumstances can cause problems. So we fixed that, and that's one of the other things that's going to go into 3.1, and we're looking forward to having that there. That'll also make things cleaner with respect to the MPTT. We have some other really cool features that I don't know if we're talking about yet, which cannot be done until we have some infrastructure into 3.1. So it's going to contain also some infrastructure to support some really cool stuff. One of them that I think we can talk about is, you guys are probably aware that we have support for app hooks, right? And you may be aware that you can actually set a namespace for your app hook, right? When you're defining your app hook, you can give it a application namespace. And when you do that, you can then create an instance namespace, and that gives you the ability of actually instantiating that app more than once in your project. So most of the time, I would say probably 99% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, you create an app for a specific purpose. So like I just talked about earlier, I have apps for say press releases, right? I don't have a reason to do that more than once in that project. So I have one app hook that's connected to one URL root in the CMS, and I don't care, right? But imagine I have something like, we have an upcoming project called Newsblog, which is still being worked on. It may already be open source, I'm not sure, but it's meant to be a replacement for Aldrin Blog. And we've noticed that a lot of people use Aldrin Blog for a blog, but some people, myself included, have also used it as a newsroom for, in fact, that Mercury project that I showed you earlier. And that's great and all, but what happens if I want to have a blog and a newsroom, right? So suddenly I can't really use it without some changes to the way I do things. So what we have now is it's another open source add-on called Aldrin App Hooks Config, and basically it's not really working yet because we require 3.1, but it'll give you the ability of attaching the same app more than once. So again, I'm going to use the example of the blog. So you'd be able to connect the blog and hook it to the blog root, or you could hook it to, and you can at the same time connect it to another route, in this case news, and they would be independent apps, right? But the problem is that they have to have their own configuration, otherwise your views don't know what to do. So that's what app.config does, and that's going to be coming out also probably before 3.1, but all of this will probably be available in an alpha version. I'm thinking in a couple weeks, probably before we have this call next month, it'll probably be out. So I'm really excited about that because mostly because the news blog I think needs it, and that should be coming out too if it's not already. I've also been working on a couple of other projects for Aldrin, which are open source. So we have Aldrin categories, which is a very simple little thing, but the idea is it's meant to be like a system-wide categories, hierarchical categories or taxonomy creator. So if you have a larger project and you want to organize some of your data, instead of using tags, which you can use independently if you want, you could also have categories. So you might have like, people, and you could put them into maybe departments, which are really categories, right? And then you might have, then maybe separately you have a blog and you have different news posts or blog posts, and you could categorize those blog posts by the same categories that you just organize all your people with. And that's pretty neat, and I think I'll be using that a lot. We have Aldrin FAQ, which is being worked on, and I think it's public already, which gives you a frequently asked questions thing. It's very simple, not really worth talking about.
With categories, can you build hierarchies of categories?
That's exactly what it is. It's for building hierarchies of categories.
What is the name?
It's called Aldrin Categories.
Thank you.
I think it's public. If it's not public, it will be soon, but I'm pretty sure it's public already. And that's meant to be used alongside any Django CMS project. Some others. We have another one called Aldrin People, which is actually an older public app it got an update, and I worked on that. Basically, it would probably be really good for you, Mr. Covington, in that it allows you to create, people objects, which you can then attach in various places. And the cool thing is, it allows you to create vCard downloads. So you'll be able to just click on that person's record and download, into your address book all their details, which is pretty cool. It's also a pretty simple app, but I think that one little extra feature is nice. The problem with it is that the vCard library that we're using is a pure Python library, and it was written for like Python 2.4, and so it's nowhere near compatibility, or is nowhere near capable for 3.0 Python. So it's only working with 2.7 right now. So if you're using 3.3 or up, you probably don't care about Aldrin People, but if you can work with 2.7, then you'll be happy to use that. There's some other ones. I know somebody else at the Divio office is working on something called Aldrin Events, which I think might have similar capabilities. Yeah, so that's it. So that's what I have to talk about this month, and we're getting close to 2 hours. But please, I really want to hear from you guys. I love to know what you guys are working on, and Mike did share with me what he's working on. Mike Cohn, what are you working on?
Well, yeah, privately at home. Let's see. I'm not muted. That's good. I'm volunteering some time to a club here in town. Not a dance club, but a flying club. And whenever we take on new members at the club, we want to be able to send them an invitation email would have like a unique session ID in the mail, so that when they clicked on it, they would go to a registration form where we could get details about them.
Sure, yeah, I've done a lot of that.
And I haven't found an example package of how to generate that unique ID and send it so that it links back to an instance of the registration forms specific to them.
Okay.
have you heard of any packages for registration that kind of sound along that line?
I know that there is a Django registration package out there. I don't remember its name, and I haven't used it in particular. I've usually created my own, and I would be more than happy to share some of the stuff I'm doing, but I don't, it's all use case specific. Like right now, I could show you some of the cryptography functions that I'm doing. Like in this project here, I think I'm using it. I know you can't see my screen, but let me get it ready. Utils? Yeah. Okay, so you might find this useful. I don't know. I'm going to share my screen again, and you can tell me if you think it's useful. So this is the photography website that I showed you before, nicknaka.com or nakaphoto.com or something. Anyway, I have a similar type of thing where you have to basically, I call it a nonce, which is actually a security term, basically a random string of bits. And so I wrote this simple little library which allows you to convert any arbitrary number of bits into a string that only contains non-confusing symbols. So I remove, say, like the L or the I and the 1 because they might be complicated for somebody to relay over the phone or whatever. Not that people will do that. So, I mean, this here, you could, if you want to, I'll probably just take a screenshot of this and you could use it. It's pretty useful for creating that stuff. And then you just database it, right? And then when they click on the link, you'll provide in the link you'll provide a get param or maybe even a path parameter where you extract this nonce out, and then you can link it to their record, right? But what I'm not doing here, which is probably more interesting to you, is how do you use that as a method of completing their registration, and that's going to be very much up to you and how you want to do your project. But I do know that there are registration helping apps out there. I've also done some social media logins, right? So you might have people and you don't want to manage their username and password, so you can say log in with your Facebook ID, or I've done GitHub ID before, and that's nice because it alleviates you from having to manage people's passwords, because they're going to lose them, or they're going to use something really simple and jeopardize the security of your whole site. So, and for that, there is one particular project. I don't remember the name, but I think it's something like Django Social Auth, or maybe even Django Social Auth 2. But you'll quickly discover that that's the most prominent one, and it's got a lot of support for almost every social network, and then some. And I would actually recommend you go that route, unless you know that your pilot friends don't have social media accounts, because it will alleviate a lot of your responsibility as the site admin.
Okay.
So that's cool. So you're working on a pilot club site, and you're going to be flying those stealth planes that I see on the wall back there. You wish, huh?
Lord, no, we don't have anything that expensive.
All right. Looks like Tobias sent you a link for something called registration. Definitely check that out. Or I'm sorry, that's the Django packages page for registration apps.
Also, I just checked out the Django social auth, and it says that it's deprecated in favor of Python social auth.
Okay, there you go. There you go. I'm sorry, who was speaking?
That was Mike Covington.
Okay, okay, super. I think that's the one I was using is Python social auth. So thanks for that. Michaelo, are you still here? No. All right. So who else? Arnie, I know what you're working on. You're working on the Pirate Party website. Jonas, what about you? What are you working on?
Yeah, it's a lot of different projects actually. We're right now running 4 simultaneous projects at our company, and we just I've been developing with Python and Django for about 3 years.
Okay.
And Django CMS is just since New Year pretty much. but I actually switched the agency I'm working at. We switched to work only with Python. Before we worked with both Python and PHP,
Okay.
but now we switched and we needed some CMS to work with.
Sure.
So
Well, I'm
now
glad you
we're
selected us instead of
yeah,
what is it? There's what is the other ones out there? Mezzanine, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
But anyway,
exactly.
I'm glad you picked us.
Yeah, it's and we're really happy. And the first project we do is it's a really short one, um, and then we have a pure Django thing for like innovation and creativity here in Sweden.
Okay.
Um, and I'm from Sweden, by the way.
Okay.
But yeah, we do a quite small website for a company called OECD.
Okay. So this sounds like it's all internal stuff, or are you more like an agency?
No, we're an agency.
Okay. Very
So
good.
we do yeah we started these three projects. One is global, and three of them are Swedish. Um, and then we yeah, as soon as our sales guy sells more, we will do more.
Very good.
Right now we're 9 people developing at the company.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. All right. So let's see. Who
It's really
else? Who's the frog? That's Mike Covington. Okay. And Tobias, you don't have a working mic, so I guess I can't ask you what you're working on. But all right. So super.
This is Mike Covington again. I just had a quick question about your Sublime Text theme. I like the icons for the file types.
Yeah. Isn't it great?
What is that?
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
called SETI UI.
okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah, you check it out, and then there's, I think they'll tell you how you can install the icon part. I really, it really improved my experience in Sublime. And then, of course, I use I don't know why this is red here, actually. I guess it didn't like my comment, but a linter. So it's red because, yeah, it's red because I have no space after the comment. So it helps me keep all my code nice and linted. But I also use a Git plugin, and I don't know if you use it, but it helps me identify the lines that I've modified. So you can see this little purple dot here, and it tells me that this is not checked in yet.
Yeah, I
Uh,
use Git Gutter. I like
yeah,
that a lot.
yeah, it's great. And I have a whole bunch that I use, but I think those are the ones that I can't live without, the Git one and the linter.
The linter that you're using, is that Anaconda?
No. I will tell you though what it is. Let's see. Packages, I think. List packages. All right. Here's packages I have. I don't know how to pronounce this one. Genero, I guess, but it gives me. I don't know if you guys are using this, but you should. It gives you Django template, uh, color coding or whatever you call it, and also Python specifically for Django. So Django keywords are colored differently, etc. The Git Gutter one, and I have a Git plugin, but I don't actually use this one. In theory, I could probably check stuff in and stuff from here, but I wouldn't even know how to do it, to be honest. I must have installed it and forgot. Boring stuff, boring stuff, boring stuff. This doesn't work at all for me, but requirements.txt is pretty boring. Schemer is what you're going to need for if you want to install SETI UI, but it'll tell you in the docs to use it. It just makes it easier for you to install the theme. SCSS, people ask me why don't I use PyCharm, and I don't know if you've noticed down here. Can you guys see my screen? You can't. Okay, sorry. I'm telling you all the stuff I have. I was showing you a list, but you can't see it. So I'll repeat it more clearly. I do have SETI UI. I have sidebar enhancements, Sublime Linter Flake 8. I think that's ultimately my actual linter. Sublime Linter JavaScript and Pep 8. Pep 8 is another one that I have. Sublime Linter dash Pep 8. And trailing spaces, that's another one I can't live without. I hate it when I have extra white space in my documents. So people often ask me why don't I use PyCharm. I do have PyCharm. I do use it. But if I have a good linter on Sublime, I find that the the core reasons why I would use PyCharm are mostly gone. And I enjoy using Sublime Text because I'm often doing markup with HTML, and then I'm using JavaScript, and then I'm doing CSS. And PyCharm will probably work for those files, but it doesn't give me any benefits. And also, I think Sublime Text is just super fast, right? You do something and it's done before you lift your finger off the key to do it. So that's why I use it. Anyway, is there any other questions? We're definitely at the 2 hour mark now.
Anyone using any other editors than Sublime?
Nope, I guess everybody is. No, Arnie, I thought you were using PyCharm. Yeah, you use PyCharm.
I use PyCharm and I love PyCharm.
And I know that another regular into these meetings that's not here today, which would be Jacob Reef, I know he uses PyCharm as well.
I only use Vim. Yeah.
Well, you'll be happy to know that Sublime has a Vim mode. So a lot of the things that you do in Vim, you can do in Sublime.
I know, but it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, not the same. I know you probably have all kinds of macros and like muscle memory keystrokes that you couldn't do. Yeah.
Pretty much 10 years going strong.
Yep. All right. Well,
How can you do it to use just Vim? It's for me like an application programmer which haven't grasped the idea of his job. I think just use an editor is the opposite of what you do as an application programmer to make a nice, functional, and good interface.
Well,
I know.
Arnie, I used to use Vim myself, and I can tell you that it's very powerful. It seems like it's simple and doesn't do much, but you'll really learn to appreciate it when you're doing all your editing over a slow SSH connection that drops packets. That's when you're going to really love Vim.
What I mean, you have to have the connections on the back of your head. You have to know all these commands. But if you have a nice user interface, you visualize the whole background and the connections and everything you need. And that is what all about application programming.
But we're programmers, right? Everybody in this room is a programmer, so we're already making all those commands in our head anyway. Anyway, I don't want to get into a religious argument about Vim or not, but I'm really hungry and I want to go eat. So I think I'm going to close up this meeting. I hope to see you guys next time. And if you guys have any ideas for the kinds of things you'd like to cover off in these meetings, please let me know in the community. And more importantly, be willing to share what you're doing. I really set these up so that everybody would share what they're working on and show us what they're doing in the back end. And I really want to cross-pollinate, right? I mean, I'm doing some pretty neat things, I think, with the custom front-end editing. But you guys probably have some really cool stuff too, and I'd like to learn from that. So
Again, thank you, Mark. We really appreciate it.
you bet.
Thank you very much.
See you next month, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.